Did you know that people actually fainted, screamed, and ran out of movie theaters during a film from 1959, not because of a monster, but because their seats were secretly vibrating beneath them? That is not a joke. That is not a rumor. That is the wild, incredible, almost unbelievable true story of The Tingler, a movie so strange, so daring, and so deeply creative that Hollywood tried to pretend some of its secrets never happened. But tonight, those secrets come out. Let's dive in and discover 20 weird and amazing facts about The Tingler. Number 20. The man who sold fear like a circus ringmaster. Before we talk about The Tingler itself, we need to talk about the man who made it possible. His name was William Castle. And if you have never heard that name before, get ready, because this man was unlike any filmmaker who ever lived. William Castle was not just a director. He was a showman. He was a dreamer. He was someone who believed that going to the movies should feel like riding a roller coaster, jumping into a haunted house, and surviving a magic trick all at the same time. Born in New York City in 1914, Castle grew up loving theater and performance. He did not come from money. He did not have a fancy film school education. What he had was something far more powerful. Imagination that never stopped running, and a deep, burning love making audiences feel something real. Castle started his career in theater, sneaking his way into meetings, talking his way into jobs, and working harder than almost anyone around him. By the time he reached Hollywood, he had already figured out something that most directors never learn. The movie itself was only half the experience. The other half happened in the theater, in the dark, surrounded by strangers. Castle believed that audiences did not just want to watch a film. They wanted to live inside it. He wanted them sweating, gripping armrests, laughing nervously, and talking about what they saw for weeks afterward. That idea became his obsession, and The Tingler was the moment that obsession reached its wildest, most unforgettable peak. Everything William Castle ever learned about showmanship, fear, and audience experience came together in this one movie. It looked like madness from the outside, but behind the curtain, it was pure genius. What looked like a circus trick was actually a revolution in filmmaking. Number 19. The crazy science behind the story. Now, let us talk about the story itself, because the idea behind The Tingler is one of the strangest, most fascinating premises ever put into a horror film. The movie follows a scientist named Dr. Warren Chapin, played by the legendary Vincent Price. Dr. Chapin has a theory. He believes that the feeling of fear, that cold, shaking, spine, tingling sensation you get when something terrifies you, is not just a feeling. He believes it is a creature, a real, living, physical creature that lives inside the human spine. According to the movie, when you feel afraid, this creature wakes up. It wraps itself around your vertebrae and squeezes. The pressure you feel, that tingling in your back, that is the Tingler. It feeds on your fear. It grows stronger the more terrified you become. And the only way to stop it, the only way to survive, is to scream. Screaming releases the tension. Screaming defeats the creature. If you cannot scream, if you are too frozen or too silent, the Tingler will crush your spine and kill you. This was complete fiction, of course. No such creature exists inside the human body. But here is what made the idea so brilliant. It tapped into something deeply human. Everyone knows that feeling. Everyone has felt fear crawl up their back. Everyone has had that moment where their throat tightened and they could not make a sound. The script, written by Rob White, took that universal experience and gave it a monster's face. A monster it was. The creature design was terrifying for its time, a dark, skeletal, lobster-like thing that looked like it crawled out of a nightmare. For audiences in 1959 who had never seen anything like it, The Tingler was deeply, genuinely unsettling. What started as a wild idea became one of horror's most memorable monsters. Number 18. Vincent Price was more than just a face. When people think of Vincent Price, they often think of that deep, smooth, theatrical voice. They think of dramatic gestures, elegant costumes, and a smile that somehow managed to be charming and terrifying at exactly the same time. But what many people do not realize is that Vincent Price was a genuinely brilliant actor who brought far more to the Tingler than just his famous presence. Price played Dr. Warren Chapin with layers that most actors would have missed entirely. Yes, the character was the hero of the story, the scientist trying to understand and defeat the Tingler. But Price played him as someone deeply flawed. Dr. Chapin was curious to the point of recklessness. He was brilliant but cold. He was capable of warmth, but also capable of dangerous obsession. And in one of the movie's most jaw-dropping scenes, Dr. Chapin injects himself with LSD as part of his research, making The Tingler one of the first mainstream American films to portray LSD use on screen. He played that scene with extraordinary commitment. He shook. He sweated. His eyes went wide with genuine-looking terror. It was theatrical, yes, but it was also strangely believable. Price later said in interviews that he found the character fascinating because Chapin existed in that uncomfortable space between hero and villain. He wanted to help people, but he was also willing to use them. He loved science more than he loved safety. Price understood that kind of character deeply, and he gave Dr. Chapin a humanity that made the horror feel personal. Without Price, The Tingler would have been a gimmick movie. With him, it became something people still talk about more than 60 years later. That wasn't just performance, it was a portrait of obsession dressed in science. Number 16. Percepto, the greatest movie gimmick ever invented. Now we arrive at the heart of everything, the secret weapon, the invention that made The Tingler not just a movie, but an event. William Castle called it Percepto. And it was absolutely, completely, wonderfully insane. Here's how it worked. Before The Tingler opened in theaters, Castle's team secretly installed small electrical buzzers, military surplus vibrating motors, beneath a select number of seats in movie theaters across the country. Not every seat, just some of them, scattered randomly through the audience. And then, at a specific moment in the film, the moment when the Tingler escapes and Dr. Chapin looks directly at the camera and shouts a warning to the audience, those buzzers activated. The seats began to vibrate. People who were sitting in those seats suddenly felt something buzz against their legs, their backs, their bodies. And because they had just spent an hour being told that the Tingler lives inside the spine and feeds on fear, the reaction was immediate, electric, and absolutely beautiful chaos. People screamed. People leaped from their seats. People grabbed strangers. People ran into the aisle. Some fainted. Some laughed so hard they cried. Some genuinely believed, for one terrifying second, that something was touching them in the dark. The buzzers were simple devices, almost primitive. Castle's team spent weeks traveling to theaters, crawling under seats, wiring motors to circuits. It was exhausting, expensive, and chaotic. But when it worked, it was the most alive a movie audience had ever felt. It looked easy. But it was the most complicated magic trick Hollywood had ever attempted. Number 15. The nurse who fainted for real William Castle was not a man who left anything to chance. When Percepto was installed and the film was ready to open, Castle wanted to make absolutely sure that the audience experience was as dramatic as possible. He hired people, real actors, planted performers who sat among the regular audience members completely invisible and unnoticed. At the key moment, when the buzzers activated and the Tingler was supposedly loose in the theater. These planted actors had very specific instructions. Some of them were told to scream as loudly as possible. Some were told to grab nearby strangers in apparent terror. And one of the most famous planted performers was a woman dressed as a nurse. Her job was to slump in her seat at the exact right moment and pretend to faint from fear. But here is where the story gets wonderfully complicated. According to accounts from the original theatrical run, there were moments when the screaming and the chaos and the vibrating seats and the darkness all combined into something so overwhelming that real audience members actually fainted, not the planted ones. Regular people sitting in a movie theater simply could not handle the combination of suggestion, sensation, and surprise. The planted nurse would rush to help them, which only made the theater more chaotic, because now there was a nurse moving through the crowd, and that made everyone else more convinced that something was genuinely wrong. Castle had designed an experience so immersive that the line between performance and reality completely dissolved. It wasn't acting. It was real fear wearing a costume. The LSD scene that made history let us go back to that scene with Vincent Price and the Elst injection, because it deserves its own section. In 1959, LSD was not yet illegal in the United States. It was being studied by scientists and researchers, and some genuinely believed it might have medical uses. William Castle and writer Rob White decided to use that real-world context to add authenticity to their film. Dr. Chapin, desperate to understand fear at the deepest level, injects himself with a powerful hallucinogen in order to experience maximum terror artificially. The scene that follows is remarkable for its time. Price convulses. He sweats. His voice breaks. The room around him seems to warp and breathe. His hands shake violently, and he stares at things that are not there. For audiences in 1959, this was unlike anything they had seen in a mainstream film. It was disturbing in a very different way from monster movie horror. It was the horror of a brilliant mind losing control, the horror of a man who thought he could control fear and discovered that fear controlled him instead. Cultural historians have pointed to this scene as one of the earliest mainstream American film depictions of hallucinogenic drug use, predating the counterculture movement by nearly a decade. Castle did not intend to make a political statement. He was making a horror movie, but by using LSD in a realistic research-based context rather than as simple villain behavior, the film accidentally became a small piece of cultural history. What seemed like a shocking scene was actually a window into a world most people had never imagined. Number 12. Black and white was a choice, not a limit. By 1959, color film was widely available, and many studios were using it. So when William Castle chose to shoot the Tingler in black and white, some people assumed it was simply a budget decision. It was cheaper. It was faster. Case closed. But that assumption misses something important. Castle made a deliberate choice to shoot in black and white precisely because it gave him control over one of the film's most powerful moments, the color sequence. By keeping the entire film in black and white, Castle created a world with no color. And then, in the bathroom scene with the deaf-mute Martha, he introduced red. Specifically, blood-red water. In a world of grays and shadows, that single color hit like a siren. It was visceral. It was alarming. It was deeply, instinctively wrong in a way that went beyond logic. Your eyes told your brain that something was terribly out of place before your conscious mind caught up. The technique is called chromatic contrast, using one color against a monochrome background to create maximum visual impact. Directors like Steven Spielberg would use the same idea decades later in Schindler's List with a child's red coat. But Castle used it first in a B-movie horror film about a creature that lives in your spine, and he used it with devastating effectiveness. The choice to stay in black and white was not a limitation. It was a weapon he was saving for exactly the right moment. Old tools, used with genius, became something that changed how filmmakers thought about color forever. Number 11. The Tingler creature almost looked ridiculous here is a secret that the production team worked very hard to keep hidden during filming. The physical Tingler creature, the one that eventually escapes and causes all the chaos in the film, almost looked completely ridiculous when it was first built. The creature design was the work of prop makers and special effects artists working on a very tight budget. The idea was a large skeletal centipede-like thing that could wrap around a human spine. On paper, it sounded terrifying. In early tests, it looked like something between a Halloween decoration and a broken umbrella. The prop kept collapsing. The legs moved awkwardly. When puppeteers tried to make it walk across the floor, it dragged and flopped in ways that were more likely to cause laughter than screams. The production team was genuinely worried. Castle reportedly watched the first tests of the creature puppet and went very quiet, which everyone around him knew was a bad sign. The solution was a combination of creative camera angles, very controlled lighting, quick editing cuts, and strategic use of shadows. The creature was almost never shown fully and clearly on screen. Instead, it was glimpsed. Suggested, seen for a second, and then gone. The audience's imagination was invited to fill in the terrifying details. And human imagination, it turns out, is far scarier than any puppet. By hiding the creature's flaws, the filmmakers accidentally created something more frightening than a fully visible monster could ever be. What looked almost like a comedy prop became one of horror's most memorable creatures, because they knew when to hide it. Number 10. The theater owner who almost refused. William Castle needed movie theaters to cooperate with Percepto. Without the theater owners agreeing to install the buzzers and follow the choreographed darkness and screaming sequence, the whole experience fell apart. And not every theater owner was enthusiastic. Many of them were worried. They had never been asked to do anything like this before. Movie theaters showed films. That was the job. They did not secretly modify seats. They did not coordinate with projectionists on precise moments to cut the lamp. They did not hire nurses to stand in aisles or plant audience members to scream. Some theater owners refused outright. They thought it was undignified. They thought it might cause injuries. They thought people might sue. One particularly memorable story involves a large theater in the Midwest whose owner heard Castle's full Percepto presentation and reportedly laughed for several minutes before finally, reluctantly agreeing. Not because he believed in it, but because Castle's enthusiasm was simply impossible to resist in person. Castle was known for his ability to sell absolutely anything to absolutely anyone. He was charming, passionate, and completely relentless. He genuinely believed in every project he ever made, and that belief was contagious. Many theater owners who agreed to Percepto admitted later that they had no idea if it would work. But something about Castle's conviction made them want to find out. And when the opening weekend box office numbers came in, extraordinary for a low-budget horror film, those same theater owners sent Castle thank you telegrams. What looked like a salesman's pitch was actually a filmmaker's dream made real, one handshake at a time. Number 9. The critics hated it. The audiences loved it when the Tingler was released in the summer of 1959. The critical response was exactly what you might expect. Serious film critics were not impressed. Reviews called it cheap, gimmicky, silly, and beneath the talent of Vincent Price. Several critics specifically mocked the Percepto device, calling it a carnival trick and an insult to serious cinema. One reviewer wrote that the vibrating seats were proof that William Castle had no faith in his own movie, that he needed to physically shake the audience because the film itself could not do the job. That review in particular stung, but while the critics wrote their dismissive articles, something else was happening at the box office. Regular people, families, teenagers, couples on dates, groups of friends were flooding into theaters. Lines stretched around the block. People came back to see it a second time. They brought their friends. They described the experience to everyone they knew with breathless excitement. The film cost roughly $300,000 to make, which was already quite low even by 1959 standards. It earned millions. And it earned that money because audiences were not looking for art house cinema. They were looking for exactly what William Castle gave them, an experience they had never had before and would never forget. The critics were measuring the Tingler against the wrong standard. It was not trying to be Citizen Kane. It was trying to make you scream in a dark room. And it succeeded beyond anyone's wildest expectations. What critics called a failure, audiences called the best night out they'd had in years. Number 8. Vincent Price's hidden sense of humor. Something that is easy to miss when watching The Tingler is just how playful Vincent Price was being throughout the entire production. Price had a reputation, deserved and earned, for deep, dramatic, operatically intense performances. His voice alone could make a grocery list sound like a threat from a Gothic villain, but those who worked closely with him always described something else. They described a man with a warm, sharp, wonderfully dry sense of humor who absolutely knew when he was in a silly movie and enjoyed every single second. Price adored William Castle. He found Castle's enthusiasm irresistible and his ideas genuinely funny in the best possible way. During filming, Price reportedly kept everyone on set laughing between takes, doing exaggerated impressions of his own serious acting moments and making jokes about the Tingler puppet that were apparently quite unprintable. But when the camera rolled, the humor vanished and the commitment returned completely. Price understood instinctively what Castle was doing. He knew that Percepto was a carnival trick. He knew the science of the Tingler was absurd, and he leaned into that absurdity with total seriousness, because he also knew that an audience can only laugh with you if they are also genuinely scared. He gave the film its heart by never winking at the camera, never letting the audience feel safe enough to fully laugh. His seriousness was the protective shell that kept the film's silliness from collapsing into pure comedy. That wasn't just acting, it was a master class in how to be funny by pretending to be completely serious. Number 7. The film was banned in some communities. Not everyone thought Percepto was charming or creative. In several American communities during the initial release of the Tingler, local authorities and civic groups raised serious objections to the film. Some took specific issue with the LSD scene, feeling that a mainstream film portraying drug use, even in a scientific context, was deeply inappropriate and potentially dangerous. Others objected to what they called the film's deliberate use of terror as entertainment, arguing that traumatizing paying customers was unethical regardless of how entertaining it was. There were genuine complaints filed about Percepto itself, specifically from people who felt they had not consented to being physically stimulated without their knowledge or agreement. A handful of theaters in particularly conservative areas refused to screen the film at all, citing community standards concerns. Some church groups organized protests outside theaters, warning that the film was morally corrupting and that Castle's gimmicks were dangerous. Looking back, these objections are fascinating. They reveal just how radical the Tingler actually was for its time. A film that made audiences part of the story, that included drug use, that used physical sensation to create psychological terror, in 1959 that was genuinely boundary-breaking. The protests and bans, ironically, only made the film more attractive to the audiences Castle most wanted. Teenagers, in particular, responded to the controversy with immediate and enthusiastic interest. What communities tried to erase became the exact thing that made the film impossible to forget. Number 6. The projectionist's secret role. Most people think of a movie theater as having two creative players, the director who made the film and the audience who watches it. But the Tingler introduced a third player who was absolutely essential to the experience: the projectionist. In 1959, movie projectionists were skilled technicians who managed the actual physical film reels, the lamp, and the sound equipment. They sat in small, usually windowless rooms above the audience and controlled everything the audience saw and heard. For the Tingler, William Castle sent every participating theater a detailed, almost military-precise set of instructions for the projectionist. They were told exactly what frame to watch for. They were told the precise moment to cut the projector lamp and plunge the theater into darkness. They were told how long to hold the darkness before restoring the image. They were told how to coordinate with whoever was managing the buzzer systems below. Castle even recorded special audio segments, including Vincent Price delivering his famous warning speech that projectionists were to play through the theater speakers at specific moments. The projectionist, in a very real sense, became a live performer, someone whose choices in the projection booth directly shaped what 400 strangers felt in their seats below. Many projectionists apparently loved this responsibility. Former projectionists who worked during the original Tingler run have given interviews describing the thrill of watching the audience through the small projection window at the exact moment they triggered the effects. They could see the reaction in real time. They were, in a strange and beautiful way, part of the show. What looked like a technical job became the most important performance in the theater. Number 5. The film that inspired generations of horror directors William Castle and The Tingler are not always given the credit they deserve in academic discussions of horror film history. Critics and scholars tend to focus on filmmakers like Alfred Hitchcock, who was operating at the same time and making films of extraordinary sophistication and artistry. But among working horror directors, Castle's name comes up again and again. John Waters, the director known for pushing every boundary of acceptable film content, has spoken repeatedly about how William Castle's theatrical showmanship shaped his own approach to filmmaking. Joe Dante, who directed Gremlins and The Howling, has cited Castle as a direct influence. William Friedkin, who directed The Exorcist, mentioned Castle's understanding of audience psychology as foundational to his own work. And then there is the most directly traceable influence of all. The director John Waters produced and helped bring to audiences a modern remake that was clearly indebted to Castle's original. But perhaps the most meaningful tribute came from Stephen King, who has written extensively about Castle's contribution to American horror. King argued that Castle understood something that more artistically ambitious directors sometimes missed, that fear is communal. It is bigger when you are surrounded by other people feeling it at the same time. Castle built that community inside the theater, with buzzers and darkness and planted performers and a voice in the dark. And every horror director who has ever tried to make an audience feel something collectively owes him a debt. One small man with big ideas quietly changed the way the world makes scary movies. Number 4. The marketing campaign was as crazy as the movie. Even before audiences got into the theater, William Castle was working on them. The marketing campaign for The Tingler was unlike anything the film industry had seen before or would see again for quite some time. Castle recorded special promotional trailers that were shown in theaters in the weeks before the film opened. But these were not ordinary trailers. In the trailers, Castle himself appeared on screen, a round, energetic, endlessly enthusiastic man in a suit, and spoke directly to the audience. He warned them. He prepared them. He told them that what they were about to experience in a few weeks was genuinely dangerous, and that he, William Castle, was personally taking responsibility for their safety. He announced that doctors and nurses would be on standby at every screening. He announced that anyone who was too frightened to continue watching could collect a refund at a special Coward's Corner located in the theater lobby, a designated area with a sign and everything. Posters for the film featured slogans designed to create maximum anxiety before a single frame was seen. Castle even wrote personal letters to exhibitors that were filled with breathless excitement about Percepto and the incredible experience their patrons were about to have. Every element of the marketing was designed to do one thing: make the movie into an event that had to be experienced. Not watched. Experienced. In that sense, William Castle invented immersive cinema marketing half a century before it became an industry standard. What looked like hype was actually a masterclass in making people feel something before they'd seen a single frame. Number 3. The Tingler's legacy in modern theme parks here is something most people do not connect, but absolutely should. The experience that William Castle created with Percepto, the vibrating seats, the darkness, the physical sensation combined with on-screen action, the sense of being inside the story rather than watching it, is the direct ancestor of every modern theme park movie ride that exists today. When you sit in a seat at a theme park and the seat moves beneath you while images fill your vision and wind and water and sound surround you from all sides, you are experiencing the direct evolution of what William Castle invented in 1959. The technology is infinitely more sophisticated. The budget is hundreds of millions of dollars rather than a few thousand. But the core idea that cinema can be physical, that the body can be part of the story, that a movie can make you feel things not just emotionally, but literally and physically. That idea lived inside a handful of Army surplus motors bolted under movie theater seats. Castle could not have imagined Disneyland's most advanced ride technology. But without his willingness to connect a motor to a seat and see what happened, the people who built those rides might never have had the concept to start from. Theme park engineers and experience designers have cited early theatrical gimmick films as part of their foundational inspiration more than once. The Tingler did not just make people scream in theaters. It planted a seed that eventually grew into one of the most profitable entertainment industries in human history. One crazy idea in 1959 quietly became the foundation of a billion-dollar industry. Number 1. The Army surplus motors that changed movie history. We arrive, at last, at the very foundation of everything. The secret so simple that it almost seems like a joke. The truth so practical and unglamorous that it makes the whole incredible story even more extraordinary. William Castle's Percepto system, the vibrating seats that terrorized audiences in hundreds of theaters across America, that made people faint and scream and run. That created one of the most legendary movie-going experiences in the history of cinema, was built entirely from surplus military motors. Specifically, they were motors that had been used in World War II military equipment and were now being sold off cheaply as the military updated its technology. They were not sophisticated. They were not powerful. They were not designed for any entertainment purpose whatsoever. They were small, simple industrial buzzers made for an entirely different world and an entirely different purpose. Castle's technical team bought them in bulk for almost nothing. They wired them to simple switches that could be activated at a signal from the projectionist's booth. They bolted them beneath theater seats with basic hardware. The total cost per theater was remarkably low, a fraction of what sophisticated special effects would have cost. And these simple machines, these humble little motors left over from a world war, changed the way people thought about what a movie could do to a human body. They proved that you did not need tremendous technology to create a tremendous experience. You needed a great idea. You needed perfect timing. You needed the courage to try something no one had ever tried before. Old war machines, new magic. And the world of cinema was never quite the same again. Bonus fact: the lost instructions that were never supposed to be found. After the Tingler finished its theatrical run, William Castle moved on to his next project with his usual unstoppable energy. The physical Percepto equipment, the motors, the wiring, the switching systems, was removed from theaters and largely discarded. By the time the film went into general home distribution and the Percepto experience became impossible to recreate in someone's living room, it seemed like the detailed technical knowledge of exactly how Percepto worked might simply disappear. And for many decades, that is almost exactly what happened. Film historians knew Percepto existed. Castle himself described it in interviews and in his autobiography, a wonderfully strange book called Step Right Up. I'll swear it's the truth, but the actual technical specifications, the exact motors used, the precise wiring diagrams, the detailed instructions sent to theater projectionists and managers, those seem to be lost. Then, decades later, something remarkable happened. During the renovation of an old movie theater in the American Midwest, a theater that had screened the Tingler during its original run in 1959, workers discovered a sealed envelope behind a wall panel near the projection booth. Inside the envelope were several pages of original Percepto installation instructions, complete with diagrams and technical specifications typed on paper that had yellowed but remained readable. The documents described, in precise and practical detail, exactly how Castle's team had wired the motors, exactly what signal system was used between projectionist and seat operators, and exactly how the choreography of the dark screen moment was meant to be timed. These documents were donated to a film archive and have since been studied by film historians, theme park designers, and immersive entertainment researchers. They revealed that the system was simultaneously simpler than anyone had imagined and more carefully designed than most people had given Castle credit for. He was not making it up as he went. He had engineered the experience with genuine care and precision. The carnival showman had been, all along, a serious craftsman wearing a circus master's costume. The instructions were never supposed to survive. But some ideas are too important to disappear. The Tingler was never supposed to be taken seriously. It was a B-movie about a fake creature made with army surplus motors and a carnival showman's instincts, starring a man with a magnificent voice and a knowing smile. And yet here we are, more than 60 years later, still talking about it, still marveling at what William Castle pulled off with such humble materials and such enormous imagination. That is what great creativity does. It takes the simple things, a buzzer, a dark room, a willing audience, and a voice in the darkness, and turns them into something that lives in people's memory forever. The Tingler reminds us that the best experiences are not always the most expensive ones. They are the ones made by people who believed in their idea completely, who fought for every crazy detail, and who understood one essential truth about human beings, that we love to be scared, together in the dark. If you enjoyed these stories about one of Hollywood's wildest and most creative films, please subscribe to this channel. Every movie hides a truth, and we will keep uncovering them, one story at a time.